if we really believe that in Christian circles specifically, that the Lord is with us through the valleys of the shadow of death, then we can like walk through that in its mess and the mud and come out really dirty, but really beautifully healed as time progresses. But it's not this like we have to be able to address it, or it's either we'll never reap the benefits, the beauty that can come from it, or we're going to eventually, when we're 80 or 90, recognize that we've never truly lived into the life we were given.
You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christy Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. Today we have a dear friend, but also our graphic designer and children's book illustrator for Famous at Home. If you've been to our website at famousathome.com, if you haven't, you need to go, but she's our web designer. She's our graphic designer. She's everything. Jane Butler, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's so good to be here. It's so fun to talk with you both.
This is like, I was saying to Jane before, I was like, I wasn't as excited to record a podcast as I was just to talk to Jane. So mostly this is going to be like a conversation between us and Jane.
Yeah.
But
and
not
you're invited in.
Stuff, not about like design, web design. She's incredible at that. She's been our graphic designer from the beginning. She illustrated the kids' books. But it even
goes all the way back to college days.
College.
I loved you then, and I love you now. And now Jane, it's just a whole different like life. And that's what we're going to talk about today is like everything life has kind of thrown at you and what you're doing with it. And just really cool where God is, I think, leading you and near. And
it's remarkable too, to see how you've taken your own story, which I wanted you to jump in by sharing your story, sharing your family and all that, but just as a mom and a wife, and then yet going after as a mom and wife, as you're being famous at home, you're also prioritizing the calling God has given you in your life. And I just think it's inspiring for so many of us to hear your story. So why don't you jump in and introduce yourself and introduce your family to us, and you can introduce where you live, because I feel like where you live is even more
totally
wild for raising kids. What's that?
That's so true. I feel like you could do a whole episode on like how to raise kids in New York City, which is its own story. That's for another time. So yeah, Jane Butler, born and raised in Canada, and that's where I met Josh and Christy in Virginia, which is going on 13, 14 years ago. Crazy.
Jane, we're almost at like 15.
We don't need to talk about that.
And technically we're from the same hometown.
Yeah, I know. It's like we go way back. We
go way back. I just didn't know you then, but
that's okay. But it's all in the right timing. And so we came to the States for school, met my now husband, and we have 3 incredible, crazy kids together. And we live in New York City. So small living is our favorite. And we live right in the dead center of Manhattan. So if you look outside, the World Trade Center is about a block away. To go kind of into our story a little bit more, and it's always hard to like recap, right? Everything that goes on in your story when you're like, how much details, how nitty gritty do we want to go? A lot of what I do now starts from when right before Andrew and I were going to get married. He was a law student, and which,
by the way, I remember the first time we met Andrew. Do you remember that?
I do.
In Branson, Missouri, at that restaurant.
Do. Law students are intense, man. And any law students listening, like they're in the thick of it at law school. Yeah. Oh yeah, Branson, all the things. And you want to talk with them, but they're so incredibly smart, and they're on a different way.
They like intimidate you.
Oh my gosh.
I wanted to like get to know him, but like he scared me a little bit.
Yes,
I wasn't really quite sure what he was saying some of the time, but
he uses all the analytical and like brilliant, and like I am 100% creative. So like we really
know you guys are such a match.
We're like, but then you should see our children. They are they're something else. So he was in his he was graduating from his first year of law school, which is like one of the most intense years of law school because it kind of deciphers what your year 2 and year 3 look like. And he was starting to have headaches around exam time, which everyone assumes, like, you're stressed. You have headaches.
Right.
Take some Tylenol. I'm not prescribing Tylenol, by the way, for people who like there could be other issues. I am not medically licensed. And so I remember him saying, I've taken Tylenol. I think he was taking Excedrin, and I was like, that should fix it. And he was like, they're not going away, and lights were hurting him. And I was like, this is weird. And so to condense that story, he ended up getting an MRI, went to the ER, got an MRI, and I drove to see him. I was living about 3.5 hours from him at that point. And I remember sitting in the emergency room and them saying, he has a 9-centimeter brain tumor. It's quickly expanding. You need to go to Norfolk General at that point and get it operated on. And I remember thinking, everything stops. Like, it stops and then it moves super fast. So you're like, you have clarity. And then I remember him getting in an ambulance, and I was in the car alone. And I remember driving behind him, being like, calling my sister, screaming at that point, just being like, what's happening? And then we got to the next hospital, and they ended up the day after flying us to Kansas, where he had his first brain tumor removal 24 days before we got married. And I remember sitting there, being present in the moment, also holding up the fact, like, are we even going to get married? Is he going to be alive? Like, what's happening in our lives? And to condense the story, which we can unpack at any point, 24 days later, we did get married. And we always say, weddings are a celebration of love, but for us, it was truly like a celebration of life. I think I was probably more excited to see him down the aisle than he was for me, but we could, argue that out a little bit. But I just remember that was the best part of the day, was literally walking to him, who was standing up at the front 24 days out from brain surgery. So fast forward from that experience and the grief, the shock, the pain that we had through those times, 8 years passed, 8 years, 9 years, almost 9 years. And 3 kids later, last August, he had like a tingling sensation, which doesn't normally happen. And so we can debrief on that. But he was just like, I have this tingling sensation near my scar. And I was like, you should just get it checked. Like, we do frequent MRIs anyways. And so he got it checked, and there was regrowth. And so that then kind of tossed us back into the, our own mortality, as well as, okay, like, we are now experiencing this painful time again, except now with 3 kids, as we lead our home together in a busy city, with millions of people and no family around. Like, how are we going to do this? And he ended up having his second surgery last August, and no treatment was required, which I'm very, very grateful for. But I just feel like it really highlighted to us just the fragility of life, and how it has really, like, turned our whole priority system upside down from the beginning. We're not perfect. We don't have this perfected marriage and everything is great because we've experienced hard together. If anything, it's like kind of condensed down what is important and what needs to be, we really try to let the little things be little. And I always say that when we were first married, we were a newlywed couple with an elderly love. And so sometimes you see older couples and, they just have this deep love for each other because they've lived a lot of life. And I feel like Andrew and I, in our first year, lived a lot of life. And now going through 2 surgeries, I feel like we're 80, 90 years old, and just like,
well, you don't look like it. So that's good.
I mean, well, thanks. I feel like it, but it's all right. It's good.
How old were your kids? Just if you don't mind sharing, just to give context for everybody listening, last August when Andrew goes through that second surgery. So the first surgery, obviously you're 24 days before your wedding. Now you've got 3 children, and just to set the tone for this, like, I think it's so critically important. I love what you're doing with Near, and I want you to be able to share that. But just as we think about grief, we think about loss, we think about we're living in a world now that is very much news 24/7. We have access to everything happening in the moment, and we're seeing brutality now We're seeing loss of life just right everywhere.
Yeah.
And, so we have to have conversations with our kids, whether it's impacting us within our home, like it is you or did with you, or it's happening outside the world. Our kids are being exposed to loss and grief like never before, I think. And I don't want to use hyperbole, but I do think with internet and everything, they're exposed to more. And so if you would just share, the ages of your kids last year and just kind of what that did for you as you now went through this all over again. I remember sitting where I was sitting when you told me about the news and just praying for you and thinking about you guys. And in that, because now it's a whole different dynamic when you got 3 kids and you're walking through this.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the biggest. I remember getting his second diagnosis and thinking, okay, this is similar in some ways because it was the same diagnosis and the reality of having to do brain surgery, but then thinking it's a totally different season for us. Not only do I know him more and we've built a life together, but he's my husband, he's the father of our 3 kids, he's our provider where we like, he's just so many things to me. And it was just a completely different, it was actually I felt like it was a deeper pain because I had more to lose. And so not saying that engaged couples, you don't have everything to lose. You do, you love that person. But I felt like when you spend 10 years, it's the same when you lose a parent, but you've had more time together. And so I feel like the deeper of knowledge of somebody, the deeper the pain in that way and deeper the grief, because you really have to give meaning to what you've lost. And I knew a lot,
So
of him and what he did. And so when Andrew was diagnosed, so our kids were 7, 4, and 2 at that point. So our 7-year-old, it goes boy, girl, girl. So our 7-year-old had the most questions and he was the most aware, both of my own emotions as well as just firstborns, just like they gauge the emotional vibe of the house. They're just like,
oh my word.
They see Andrew and I disagree. They're like, what's happening? Like they watch it, if they, there's a few, my kids are the very typical, like firstborn, middleborn baby. And she knows it, by the way, that baby, she knows she's the baby. And so
like Micah, very well aware.
They are, yes, it is for another time. And so I remember we talk very openly of just the reality of life, right? Like we're not going to sugarcoat our kids to what happens in the world. I mean, New York City is a microscope of everything, that happens in many ways. And so we talk openly about like death and hope and what happens and the logistics and grief and pain. And like, we just bring it to a place that's their level. Kids are smart. They might not be able to articulate to the degree that we want as adults, but they're smart and they have the most, like, if they're not vocalizing it, they're thinking about something. And I remember lying in bed with Jack, oldest, and just kind of sitting there and saying lightly, like how I was feeling, like I'm feeling kind of sad about this, and letting him, instead of asking him questions like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And like probing questions, but just letting him see that I'm feeling the emotions and having him say, yeah, I'm feeling sad too, or I'm scared, or what does happen. And I think that opens up a real intimacy with your kids for them to see you feel things, right?
Good.
We aren't just going to sugarcoat it, because inevitably, like, life doesn't sugarcoat things. And so we talk openly about how we are feeling, how we're walking this through, where do we put our hope and what we do expect the outcome to be. And so it was a really interesting time to not only navigate my own emotions with Andrew, but to also let our kids now see, okay, like mom is sad, or dad is weary, like letting them just live it out with us and letting them have the space to be those feelings too.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah. And especially when you've got a book named What Am I Feeling that could really help you with that process, right?
Totally.
It's almost like it was prophetic, we put that together. How many years ago that was?
Yeah.
I know. Like, let me show you all the faces. Which one do you resonate with?
Yeah, I mean, I still use them, Jane. I mean, I really do. Like, I think exactly what you're sharing though. It's like, and people are so intimidated by that because it feels emotion feels like it could take you out. Like if I actually I'm honest with my kids, like I don't have the answers. And I think that's
Right.
what's so hard as a parent. Like
Right.
you're in this position, you can't even tell them like,
Mm-hmm.
guys, it's going to be okay. And I heard you reference toxic positivity. And I'd love for you to even share that, because especially in Christian spaces, that's not something we talk about very often. But how have you approached that? Because I know so many parents like, guys, it's going to be fine. It's like we toss out these phrases or these things.
It'll be good.
It'll be good. Yeah.
It'll all be good. Yeah.
Thinking
And
that
especially in faith communities, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting too, because parents are like, well, we label our kids' emotions because we're like, well, we know it all. But actually, they're their own human, like, surprise. Like, they've left our bodies, they're their own.
Yeah.
And there's an element of like, C.S. Lewis says it great. He says, I sat with my anger long enough to discover it was grief. And so it's like, we can say, well, they're just angry. And it's like, well, angry is like the umbrella, right? But there's actually a ton of more emotions that equal the anger. And so let them say things of like, okay, they're angry and they're really sad. Like, you don't diminish the sadness and just blanket it with anger. So let them, I feel like as parents, we need to be aware that same with us, right? Like, with my therapist, I've been like, I'm so angry. And he was like, okay, let's like break that down, because you can't just be 100% angry. Like, it has to basically be up as to like, you're angry, you're also sad and heartbroken and weary and like all of these other feelings. And so I think that feelings chart just like highlights there's a lot of other feelings that you can feel, not just the ones that we think are most common. And I would caution parents to be like, well, let's just label it like they're just this, because there's a lot more going on in that little mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, toxic positivity is like it's something that I really want culture, especially in like Christian circles in the Bible Belt specifically. Like, if we really, my friend and I were talking about this yesterday, if we really read the Psalms in the emotion that they were written, our tone would be a lot more dire, desperate, honest. It would lament, right? It's not just, it feels like we talk about it. And I've seen people, when someone posts something on Facebook and people are like, well, God is good, like everything happens for a reason. It's like, that's not helpful at this time. Like, there is no fix it solution for a time of suffering. Like, we're just called to lament and just say, this is really hard. Like, life is really hard. And we can support that biblically, like, right? Like, just Job sitting there being like, this is like, life is really impacting me right now. And I feel like we're really good at avoidance. We're like, oh, but that's so painful. Like, let's like, we don't want to get, because if we open up that door with them, then we're going to hear all their pain and like, let's just like remind them all the good stuff.
Yep.
And when you talk about that, I read Psalms every day, and what you're saying, I have a resistance sometimes to wanting to read the Psalms, because there's times where I don't relate to what's being said,
right?
Especially when I don't, you don't have an enemy trying to track you down in that moment. But there are times where it does relate very, very much. Might not be an actual physical enemy, but there's things that are happening in my life that feel very much like the enemy's coming after me. But I also think too that on the flip side of that, Jane, and this is kind of what I want to describe or get to with you on this, is I also don't think that we as Christians do a great job of experiencing joy either. It's like we don't celebrate well because we don't go into the pain well. Romans 5:3-5 says to rejoice in suffering. And because with suffering comes perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. And I think that's what you embody. That's what you and Andrew embody. That's what you guys have been through. And I think that true joy comes on the other side of suffering. It comes on the other side of when we have embraced grief, when we have, as C.S. Lewis said, sat with our anger long enough to experience the grief, as opposed to placating it, or, oh, well, Jesus wins in the end, or, we can say true statements.
And that's what's hard, I think, because they're
true statements.
Like, and I think we all want to,
we don't experience them.
Yes. Sorry. Like we all want to believe it so badly. Like, but God wins, right? Like, right. It's like, we're saying it, but we're like, look, like, right. Like, we just need to be reassured. Like, this has to get better. Right.
But I think that's an indictment on our faith when we do that.
Oh, totally. And I think that's what I want to talk about though, because Jane, like, you have sat on the other side, I am sure, of many comments that were not helpful, like in their own attempt to navigate
Yeah.
their grief and yours, not knowing, the avoidance is so real. I know, like, I mean, as someone who sits with people in their pain, like, you watch the ways they just try to, like, they say one
I don't want to deal with
statement.
it. Yeah.
Yes. And then it's like this counter of like, oh, because it's like, I can't, if I sat with that, it would take me out.
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you to just share like some of those real practically, because I think we want to do better. We want to be able to sit with those that suffer. We want to know what to do when we walk through it.
Right.
But how do you actually come alongside someone who is in, it's not just, and it's because it's not just grief, right? We're talking about grief, but there's so much confusion too. Like when people are in those seasons of like, I really don't know what's going to happen. And we want to come in with these really grandiose, beautiful statements of hope.
We just want to fix it. I think that's the energy.
Yeah.
Because we don't like it. So we want to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And make them feel better. But what do we need to do?
Yeah. I think there's just so much to unpack there. I think, Josh, what you were saying about the pain and the joy, I really get this picture always about however deep your pain is. And if you sit with it, that's how deep your joy will be. Like you have the potential to like go to like the deepest valleys of pain to experience the highest mountains of joy. But you have to dig and touch the bottom of the ocean to appreciate how big the ocean is, you know? And I think there's something that like, if we really believe that in Christian circles specifically, that the Lord is with us through the valleys of the shadow of death, then we can like walk through that in its mess and the mud and come out really dirty, but really beautifully healed as time progresses. But it's not this like, we have to be able to address it, or it's either we'll never reap the benefits, the beauty that can come from it, or we're going to eventually, when we're 80 or 90, recognize that we've never truly lived into the life we were given, right? And accepted it and been like, man, this is my story. Like I've had to like update my story now with the fact that not only do I have 3 kids and I live in New York City, but my husband could and possibly might have another brain tumor. And like I have to like stay engaged with that because that helps me live in the present, as well as not put my hope in what is just an illusion anyways, that we're going to be, you know, happily married in 50 years, but that the Lord is going to see us through that. That's what my hope is in. It's not in this illusion that we're good to go and we've got like the, you know, pass go, collect $200 and you're good to go. It's not. That's not where I look to for my hope. But I think like, Christy, what you were saying about, what people were saying, a lot of people would say, and I want to be careful because I'm like, people are going to misquote me, but people would say, well, God is good. And that's so true, that I believe that with my whole heart. And if Andrew were to pass 9 years ago, God would have still been good. Like, don't make what happened, what is currently my reality, dependent upon God's goodness. Like, you don't have to remind me of that. Like, I know that.
Because it dismisses your pain.
Wow.
It dismisses it. And it's like, that's helpful maybe for you to say to your own self, but to someone that's like suffering or in the middle, it just feels like you're just pouring gas on a fire. Like, God is good. Look how much pain you're in. Like, that's not helpful. I think some of the most helpful things is just saying like, I'm so sorry this is happening to you, right? Like, we live in a broken world. People a lot of the time don't ask for it. They don't say, yes, like bring a hard story to my life. It's the reality of like what we live in. And so the empathy of like, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. And sitting with them in their pain is the most effective, whether you say anything or not. I think I just tell people, like, as pun focused as it is, like, your gift to them is your presence. Like, you just sit with them, whether it's on a phone or it's at a coffee shop, and you're just sitting there with them in it, and you're not being awkward. Like, you're just like sitting there and you're like, I have nothing to say, but I'm here for you. So powerful. And we've got to get better at doing that, because you don't have to have this, you know, Instagrammable quote.
Right.
You can just sit there and hold their hands, or just be like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here.
I'll tell you the Instagrammable quote that Dr. John Townsend taught me a number of years ago is, it's 3 simple words that are most profound in situations like this, is tell me more.
Yeah. Just let them
talk.
open the door for that.
Yeah. Tell me more. I'm interested. I want to know more. Yeah. Tell me more about
Because
that.
in all honesty, like you want to run, like you don't want to sit with them. And I think that's like, let's just lay that out there and bring that in the light. Like we all feel that. And that's real too. Like, because realize you're bringing all of your pain, all of your fear, all of your grief, probably unresolved, into the conversation too. And then you're met with theirs. And for some people, and I just want to lay this blanket of grace, like for some people, it's like, I can't hold anymore. Like I can't withstand this. Like, because there's so much unresolved in me.
Yeah.
And and maybe current, it could be past, but to just like, there is a grace for that, to realize there is a capacity we all have to carry the hardships of life. And like Jane's saying, if you've never dug to the bottom and you've never let yourself go there, like if you just medicate it away, avoid it, like, which culturally that's just what we're shown to do.
Right.
So we don't have, like, it's not, I mean, some of the other like ancient cultures of the world where they would, wear their, like tear their clothes, sackcloth and ashes, and they would sit, like some of the Jewish traditions where they sit, is it Shiva, sitting Shiva? I don't want to misquote that, but where they sit in grief with one another for like like months, like is it 30 days, I think. We don't do that. And so no wonder when we come across new grief from someone else, we don't know what to do because we can't bear any more than we're already carrying.
And I think the flip side of that too, the powerful thing about grace is that even when you can't carry your own stuff, or you feel like entering into someone else's story is what gets us outside of our own.
Right.
And a lot of times we live in like such selfishness because we make our issues bigger than they might need to be.
Right.
And this isn't, I'm not trying to, minimize anybody's pain. I don't want to ascribe meaning to anybody else's pain or minimize their pain. At the same time, I think God's economy works just as you were talking, Jane. Experiencing the suffering is where the ocean of joy comes. It's like when Jesus says, "Those who have been forgiven much will also be able to forgive." It's like it's this inverted dichotomy where it's like you sit in someone's pain even when you don't even feel like you have the capacity to do it. You leave that being able to hold their pain and experience the world in a whole new way because you've gotten outside your own. And you've entered into somebody else's. And I think there's a beauty in that. I think there's a beauty in that grace. Jane, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about, okay, so we've talked a lot about your story and kind of, which is, you are so articulate, you are so well-spoken, and you can tell you've lived this journey. You can tell you've walked this journey with integrity. And I just want to honor that deeply because what's also come out of this is a new initiative that you have as a result of your own experience. And I would love for you to share a little bit about that for other people.
Yeah, it's so funny. I feel like as I like live in the moment and I tell the story, I know some people might have just met me and think like, oh, well, this is always what she's been doing. And it's like, actually, no, I feel like I'm every day unveiling like, what am I doing? Like this is like evolving and I'm now in this place and somehow my story works into this. And so I really think like one of the biggest things that's come out of a diagnosis that's been so dramatic as Andrew's has been the recognition of our mortality, but then also like the legacy that we leave for our kids, right? Like we aren't here forever and we continue to build upon generation and generation and the values and the morals and who we are and how we lead our families. Like I want to be remembered, not just for like, Grandma Jane, like look at her shine, but just like this is how we want to pass down these beautiful traditions and family. Like and I think there's so much so much beauty in how we live our lives that needs to be captured before we pass, because like we're humans. It's just a reality that we don't want to talk about. But I'm like, if you recognize it, so much, you can do so many beautiful things for your life and for your kids' life and onward to capture it. And so we've established NEAR, and NEAR is essentially like, just like how there's a whole planning and inspiration for weddings and what you can do, ours is for life. Like as you navigate through like the end of life or grief or a diagnosis, there's care registries, celebration of life inspiration, different legacy projects. And we're really trying to highlight the beauty to care well, not only for like the sandwich generation, they're caring for their kids and their parents, because that's a whole logistical, issue, right? Like how much we have to prepare and plan and paperwork and all the things when it comes to those things, but making sure people have an opportunity to say, we're going to care better and we're going to connect better during this time. And we're going to celebrate life when it has been lived. And so we've launched Near, and it's a new platform that kind of pulls all those pieces together and gives people a place to say, okay, I need to get this stuff done to be better organized. I can use the care registry to better care well. Or I'm planning, an unexpected celebration of life service. And there's, lots of details and materials they can pull from Near for that. So it's a really beautiful platform that is, obviously personally connected to.
Oh, and what I love, Jane, is like, so you're right. It's me emotional. The whole wedding industry, right? Cool. It's great. We put so much effort into it. We just came through, a family wedding, and it's so fun, and everyone wants to be a part of it. And we've also come through the other side of it.
Yeah.
Recently. And the end of life is very lonely, because just those few family members who are, tasked with the details and all, it's overwhelming. They're walking through their own grief, and then they're having to make decisions on just the real practicalities of,
right.
end of life service, but closing a home, like what estate, transfer and all this. And it's a lot. And I just love that you are coming alongside people in that process that feels it all, and it normalizes it, I think too. I think that's what you're doing too, is this beautiful like arm around you of like, yeah, and we're near. It's a great time. Like phenomenal.
Yeah.
Name, because it is what people need in that season. And I just commend you. I mean, this is so all of your gifts and your story all together, like shining. And I'm just really proud of you.
I want to just say staynear.co is the website. We'll obviously put it in the show notes for you guys. But what's really powerful about this, and I'm going to just brag on it for a second, but when times are hard, and this is all about knowing someone who's experienced loss or grief, and especially coming up with the holiday season. And so I love how you guys have highlighted that when times are hard, you can give a meaningful gift, you can organize, share specific needs, you can organize support for others. And I know that came out of your story, being in New York without family nearby, just even having a support network around you. And I love this because there's a spot on the website where it says beyond money and meals, because that's typically like what we said with Meal Train or that type of thing. But you have over 1,000 different gifts that that people can go jump on and send to others in a time of need. There's just so much here that please jump in at staynear.co. This is for all of us, because every single person, if you have not, you're either this is the crazy part. You're either coming into a season of loss and grief, you're in one, or you're coming out of one.
Right.
And
right.
or someone who is in one of those three.
Someone who is, yeah.
And that is what is beautiful about what you guys are doing, is it's an opportunity for us to enter into it for ourselves, but also really learn how to come alongside somebody in a way that's just simple. Like just this simple act of sending someone, like I saw a $15 Audible gift card, like just sending someone an audiobook, like sending someone a pair of PJs, like there's like sending some, like just as a gift. It doesn't require, there's so much beauty that comes when you receive something like that. And knowing we currently have a friend right now, literally while we're recording this episode, who's in surgery. And I just got a text, by the way, that they heard that things are going well. And so it's like but just the simple text, like we're praying for that person right before we did this, it's a mutual friend of all of us, praying for that person, get a text about, like, just, I know I've been on the receiving end of that. When you're in the hospital and you receive a text from just people that you're acquaintances, somewhat friends, friends. I mean, it's not like we're super close, but we know each other well. enough. But when you see that name pop up and you're like, oh, wow, you genuinely are thinking of us during this moment, there's just something beautiful to know that you feel like you've gotten that support. And that's what you guys are offering. It's unbelievable.
I think so many people are afraid to do that because they're like, I don't want to be too much. I don't want to be overbearing. I don't want to, insert myself. And there's this insecurity, like, I don't really know what to say. I don't really know how to,
right.
but yeah, like when we've walked through, losing Josh's dad. And I mean, that was probably the most personal one, aside from, grandparents and family members for us, but that was the ones that just reached out, like even just to show they were aware of our pain. Even if they didn't know they're not related to the situation at all. It was like, oh my gosh, you see me. Like, I remember friends that drove down from Canada for the funeral. No idea.
8-hour drive.
Make me cry now. They just showed up.
And then they turned around and drove back.
All the way back.
Like,
with their kids. Like, it was just this, like,
remarkable.
I will never forget it. Never. And sorry. Not really apologizing for my tears. It's just that it's annoying to listen to. Anyway.
But you're right. We've forgotten how to just care.
Yeah.
It's like something hard and we're like double tap or swipe, or it's like, really? Like, that's kind of where we've ended up. Like, we've got to rebuild that human connection to care better.
So good.
And so I feel like it's kind of our mission to, like, we have this, my business partner, Christina, although, I dream of stuff all the time, of just like, we're on a mission to help people care, connect, and celebrate life better. And that's like our main, like, we can do that. Okay. And that's through recognizing that our days are limited. And so how can we do that?
So good. Oh my gosh. It's Jesus leading in grace and following in truth, right? It's like you're leading in grace. You're just loving people in grace who are hurting and in pain. And it's celebrating life as a result, because that's what Jesus did. And you are being the hands and feet of Jesus in the midst of your own pain and in the midst of raising your own kids. Like, it's just awesome to watch you. Yeah. And so I really want to encourage everybody listening, go to staynear.co. Tell friends about this, share this everywhere. Jane, is there anything else that you would point them to that we can just champion in this initiative?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of resources now on the site. We have like if you're caring for your parents, we have like a simple, like, check in within yourself caregiving checklist. And we have our new holiday gift guide, which I feel like, I know it's, not the holidays yet, but people are already looking into those. And, like, don't forget the people that have lost somebody this year. So if it's a parent or a spouse or a child, like, just, again, the most simple gift can be a hug to them if you can't be there physically, to be a hug. And so make sure that we're aware, not only to celebrate and to give gifts to the people that are in our lives, that are sitting around the tree or sitting in our living room this holiday season, but to remember that there's the empty chair, in somebody's life. And so we've got to have that awareness and that empathy to realize that you can connect with that person too. So it's all on the site.
Amazing. Oh, Jane, we love you. We are so grateful for you. And I just, I want to remind everybody that as you listen to this episode today, to not be afraid to embrace the hard times, to not be afraid, because it's in the hard times. I think that there's one message that Jane shared today that it sticks with me. Life flows from those moments. Life flows. And if you're struggling with that, I think that and I do this all the time, I think there's a faith component that we just got to just ask God, help my unbelief, help my unbelief, help me see you, help me to know that though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Surely goodness and mercy follow me all the days of my life, that it is following me, and that there's beauty and in all of this. And I just, a lot of this reminds me of going back to that journey with my dad. And so press into life, that's my parting words.
You're exceptional, Jane Butler.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we could connect and share all the lessons learned. I'm sure there's more to learn, but
I know, but I think that's it. This is getting me today, but you're sharing this while you're still in the middle of the story. And for those listening, I think it's easy to hear Jane's story and be like, oh, it's just like this package, like she walked through this hard time and like look what she's done with it. And isn't this so like it's like a Hallmark movie, like it's a beautiful story. And I want them to like hear we're all in the middle of our story. Like there's still the unknown, there's still the grief, and yet. And so for those that are walking through really hard things, like we see you, we hear, and the grace I think that we carry for other people is reflective of the grace we carry for ourselves. And so like I think that's what you're sharing too, is like you've allowed a lot of grace for yourself, for your kids, for Andrew, as you've walked through, and you still are walking through. I mean, there's possibilities still, there's decades of still in question, and yet you're embracing the joy and the pain. And I'm proud of you and I love you. And thank you for sharing your story today.
Until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you will walk is through your front door.
Keep being famous at home. We love you.